and welcome to Crowvane Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together. My dad is not a religious person, and he has never been the type to believe in supernatural things. He is the kind of person who makes fun of ghost stories, signs from the universe, spirits, dreams that mean something, and all those strange little moments people talk about when they cannot explain what happened to them. If someone says they saw something in the corner of their room, he is usually the first one to say it was probably a shadow. If someone says they heard a voice, he will say they were tired or half asleep. If someone says they felt a presence, he will shrug and say the human brain is good at scaring itself. That has always been his way. He is practical, blunt, and not easy to impress when it comes to anything that cannot be explained with common sense. That is why this story has always stayed with me. It did not come from someone who wants to believe in ghosts. It did not come from someone who enjoys making every strange thing sound mysterious. It came from my dad, a man who would rather laugh at supernatural stories than take them seriously. He is not dramatic about it either. He does not sit around telling people that he had some deep spiritual experience or that he has proof of life after death. In fact, most of the time, he acts like he does not even like talking about it. But every now and then, if the subject comes up in the right way, he will mention this one thing that happened to him, and even he does not have an explanation for it. When my dad was a child, his family had a housemaid who worked for them for many years. This was when he was still young, and from what I understand, she was around the house enough that she became part of the rhythm of his childhood. She was not just some random person who came and went without anyone noticing. She was there during the ordinary days, the quiet mornings, the afternoons when the house was busy, the small moments that children remember without realizing they are becoming memories. My dad would have seen her around the kitchen, the hallways, the rooms, doing the work she had to do, talking to my grandmother, maybe telling him to move out of the way, or eat something, or stop making a mess. I do not know every detail of their relationship, because my dad does not tell stories like that in a soft, emotional way, but I know she had been part of his childhood home. Then, when he was probably around 12 or 13 years old, she moved away. Life changed, like it always does. People leave. Families move on. Children grow up. The people who once seemed like permanent parts of your world slowly disappear into the background of memory. At that age, my dad was probably old enough to understand that she was gone, but young enough that he did not think too deeply about it. When you are a child, even someone leaving your daily life can feel normal after a while. One day they're there, and then they are not. At first, you notice their absence. Then the house adjusts. The days continue. The empty space they left behind slowly gets filled by other things. After she moved away, my dad did not keep in contact with her. He was a child, so that is not surprising. She was someone from his parents' household, not one of his school friends or close relatives. As the years went by, he thought about her less and less. Eventually, he did not think about her at all. That is not meant in a cruel way. It is just how life works. People from childhood can become like old photographs in the back of your mind. You do not hate them. You do not forget them completely. But you stop carrying them with you every day. More than 15 years passed. By then, my dad was no longer a boy. He had grown up and built his own life. He had responsibilities, routines, and worries that had nothing to do with the housemaid from his childhood. He had not spoken to her in over a decade. He had not seen her. He had not heard any recent news about her. From what he says, he had not even been thinking about her. There was no reason for her to be on his mind. No family gathering had brought up her name. No old photo had reminded him of her. No conversation had made him think back to that part of his childhood. She was simply not present in his thoughts. Then one night, everything changed in the strangest possible way. My dad says he woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. It was not the kind of waking where you slowly drift back from a dream and realize you need water or the bathroom. It was sharp and sudden, like something had pulled him awake. He was fully awake almost at once, lying there in the dark, with a feeling he could not explain pressing on him. He had an overwhelming urge to contact the old housemaid. That was it. No dream he could remember. No voice in the room. No figure standing at the foot of the bed. No dramatic vision or message. Just a sudden, powerful need to reach out to a woman he had not spoken to or even thought about in more than 15 years. At first, he did not understand it. He lay there trying to make sense of why her name had appeared in his mind after so long. It was not like he had been worrying about her. It was not like he had promised to call her and forgotten. It was not like she was part of his daily life. She belonged to a completely different time, a time when he was still a boy in his family's house. Yet there she was in his thoughts, suddenly and strongly, as if someone had placed her name directly in front of him and would not let him look away. The feeling would not pass. That is the part he always makes clear. It was not a quick thought that came and went. It was not the normal kind of random memory that sometimes appears at night when your mind is half asleep. Everyone gets those. You suddenly remember an old teacher, a childhood neighbor, someone you once knew, and then you fall back asleep. But this was different. He felt like he had to do something. He felt like he needed to contact her. It was urgent in a way that made no sense. My dad is not the sort of man who follows strange feelings easily. He is not someone who wakes up and thinks, maybe this is a sign. He would usually talk himself out of it. He would tell himself he was dreaming, or that his mind was wandering, or that he had eaten too late and slept badly. But this feeling was strong enough that he could not ignore it. Something about it bothered him too much. It kept pulling at him. The problem was that he did not have her number. He had not spoken to her in years, and this was someone connected to his childhood home, not his current life. So he did the only thing that made sense. He called my grandmother. Imagine being my grandmother in that moment. It was the middle of the night, or at least late enough that a phone call would not feel normal. She answered, probably wondering what was wrong, because unexpected calls at odd hours rarely feel harmless. And then my dad asked about the old housemaid. Not about a current emergency, not about something practical, but about someone from the past. Someone he had not asked about in years. My grandmother was probably surprised. How could she not be? There was no normal reason for him to bring her up at that exact moment. No reason for him to be asking about her in the middle of the night after more than 15 years of silence. But then, my grandmother told him something that made the whole situation impossible to dismiss. The housemaid had passed away about half an hour before he called. Not the day before, not a week earlier, not some vague recent time that could be brushed off as coincidence more easily. About 30 minutes before his phone call. That means my dad woke up with an unexplained urge to contact a woman he had not thought about in over a decade. And when he called to ask about her, he found out she had just died. That is the whole story, and yet it is the kind of story that does not leave you alone. Nothing jumps out. No ghost appears. No door slams shut. No lights flicker. But in some ways, that makes it more unsettling. It is quiet. It is simple. It happens inside a person, in the space between sleep and waking, in the strange private place where thoughts come from somewhere we do not always understand. And because it happened to my dad, of all people, it feels even harder to explain away. For anyone else, he might have made fun of it. If one of his friends told him I woke up and suddenly felt like calling someone, and then I found out they had just died, he probably would have said it was a coincidence. He might have said that the mind remembers more than we think, or that maybe they had heard something about the person without realizing it. He might have said people only remember the strange coincidences and forget the thousands of random thoughts that mean nothing. And honestly, those are fair points. They are the kind of explanations that practical people give, and most of the time, they might be right. But this happened to him, and that changes things. My dad still does not walk around calling himself a believer. He did not become religious because of it. He did not start telling people he had a message from the other side. He did not suddenly believe every ghost story he heard after that. He remained the same man in most ways, skeptical, practical, ready to joke about supernatural stuff. But when this one memory comes up, there is always a slight change in him. Not fear exactly, not sadness exactly, more like discomfort. Like the story does not fit neatly into the way he wants the world to work. I think what scares people most about stories like this is not that they prove something. It is that they suggest something. They suggest that maybe there are connections between people that do not end just because years pass. They suggest that maybe a part of us can feel something happening far away, even when we do not know it in any normal way. They suggest that death might send out a ripple, and sometimes, for reasons we cannot understand, that ripple reaches someone who once mattered. The old housemaid had been part of my dad's childhood. Maybe, even after all those years, some part of that connection still existed. Maybe he had forgotten her in the normal daily way, but some deeper part of him had not. Maybe, when she passed away, something in him felt it. Not with his ears, not with his eyes, not with any of the normal senses, but in a way that woke him up and pushed her name into his mind. Or maybe it was only coincidence. That is the uncomfortable thing. There is always a normal answer, if you want one badly enough. People think random thoughts all the time. Out of all the people we remember in our lives, eventually one of those memories might line up with something happening to that person. Maybe my dad's mind randomly pulled her name from the past on the same night she died. Maybe the timing was strange, but not impossible. Maybe there is no message, no sign, no supernatural connection. Maybe it was just chance. But chance does not always feel like enough. It might explain the facts, but it does not explain the feeling. It does not explain why he woke up so suddenly. It does not explain why the urge was strong enough for a skeptical man to call his mother and ask about someone he had not spoken to in more than 15 years. It does not explain why the call came only about half an hour after she had passed. It does not explain why, out of every person from his past, it was her name that came to him at that exact time. I sometimes wonder what he felt after my grandmother told him. I imagine him sitting there in the dark with the phone in his hand, suddenly much more awake than before. I imagine the room feeling too quiet around him. I imagine him trying to respond normally, maybe asking a few questions, maybe not saying much at all, because what can you really say to something like that? If he had been worried about her for days, it would make sense. If someone had told him she was sick, it would make sense. If he had dreamed about her and then called later out of curiosity, that would still be strange, but easier to frame. But waking with a sudden need to contact her right after she died is something else. It is the kind of thing that makes even a skeptical person pause. I do not know much about the housemaid herself. I do not know what kind of life she had after she moved away. I do not know whether she ever thought about my dad or his family in her later years. I do not know if she remembered him as the boy he had been, running around the house when she worked there. Maybe she did. Maybe she did not. But I like to think that people who spend years inside a home leave marks on each other, even if life carries them in different directions. A child remembers the adults who were there. An adult remembers the children they watched grow for a while. Those connections may fade, but maybe they do not disappear completely. Maybe, at the end of her life, something reached back. I know that sounds sentimental, and my dad would probably roll his eyes if I said it too dramatically. But I cannot help thinking about it. Maybe she did not come to him as a ghost in the way people imagine. Maybe there was no spirit standing beside his bed. Maybe it was not a haunting. Maybe it was simply a final pull from one life to another. A quiet goodbye passing through whatever space exists between people who once shared time together. That idea feels less frightening to me than some ghost stories. It feels sad and strange, but also gentle. My dad did not wake up terrified. He did not see something awful. He just woke up with the need to remember someone. Someone who at almost the same time had just left the world. And maybe that is why the story feels so real. It is not overdone. It is not trying to be scary. It does not need a haunted house or a shadowy figure. It is just a man waking in the dark with a name in his mind, calling his mother, and learning that the person connected to that name had died 30 minutes earlier. Even now, I think about how easily that moment could have been missed. If he had ignored the feeling and gone back to sleep, he might have heard the news later and never connected it. If he had waited until morning, the timing would have seemed less sharp. If he had brushed it off as a random thought, it would have become nothing. But he did call. He acted on the urge, and because of that, the timing became clear. That is what makes the story hard to forget. It also makes me wonder how many moments like that happen to people and get dismissed. How many times does someone think of an old friend right before receiving bad news? How many people wake up with a strange heaviness and later find out someone they knew passed away? How many of those moments are brushed aside because they do not fit into normal conversation? Maybe more than we think. Maybe the world is full of quiet connections we only notice when something extreme happens. My dad would probably not like that explanation. He would probably say I am making it bigger than it is. He might still call it coincidence if someone pressed him. But I know that even for him, this one thing has never had a clean answer. He can make fun of supernatural stories all he wants, but there is still this one story in his own life that does not fit his usual way of thinking. That is why I believe it matters. Not because it proves ghosts are real. Not because it proves religion or spirits or anything specific. But because it shows that sometimes something happens that makes even the most skeptical person stop and wonder. Sometimes the world gives you a moment that feels too exact to be random and too quiet to be fake. Sometimes someone from the past reaches your mind at the exact moment they leave the world, and all you can do is sit there afterward and try to explain why. My dad was not close to the housemaid anymore. He had not spoken to her in years. He had not even thought about her in over a decade. But on the night she died, about half an hour after she passed, he woke up with an urge he could not explain. He called my grandmother. asked about her, and learned the truth. That is all that happened. And somehow, that is enough to make the story one of the strangest things I have ever heard. About a year ago, I was in bed at home in my apartment at about 10 p.m. It was not very late, but it was one of those nights where the whole place already felt quiet, and still, like the rest of the world had turned down its volume. I lived alone at the time, so there was no one else moving around, no one in the kitchen, no one using the bathroom, no roommate watching TV in another room, no footsteps in the hall that belonged to someone I knew. It was just me, my bed, my room, and the familiar little sounds of the apartment settling around me. I was lying in my double bed, almost asleep, but not quite there yet. I was right on that edge between being awake and dreaming, where your thoughts start to get loose and strange, but you still know where you are. I was facing away from the inside of the bed, turned toward the outside edge, with my back toward the empty space behind me. I remember being comfortable and tired, not scared at all. There was no reason to be scared. It was my room, my bed, my apartment. I had gone to bed the same way many times before. Then I heard it. Behind me, very clearly, I heard the sound of someone else in my bed. It was not a vague sound. It was not one of those little creaks or pops that apartments make at night. It was not the radiator, not the pipes, not the building shifting, not a neighbor through the wall. It was close, too close. It came from the empty side of my double bed, just behind my back. First, I heard breathing, slow, soft, and human. Then, I heard a small rustling of the sheets, like someone had shifted their body slightly, or moved an arm under the blanket, or adjusted their weight against the mattress. The strange thing is that it did not scare me right away. For the first few seconds, my tired brain accepted it like it was normal. I was so close to sleep that I think part of me forgot where I was and what my life actually looked like. The sound of another person breathing behind you in a double bed is not always scary if your brain believes someone is supposed to be there. For maybe 5 seconds, I just lay there with my eyes half closed, still and calm, hearing that soft breathing behind me, feeling like someone was lying there in the bed with me. Then I remembered. I lived alone. There was no one behind me. There was no one who should have been in that bed, no boyfriend staying over that night, no flatmate in the room, no friend crashing at my place, no one. The second the thought hit me, it was like electricity shot through my entire body. I went from almost asleep to completely awake in an instant. My heart slammed against my chest. My eyes opened wide. Every part of me went cold and alert. I did not move at first. I was facing away from the sound, and for a horrible moment, I could not bring myself to turn around. I kept listening, trying to hear it again, trying to decide if I had imagined it. The room felt frozen. I could hear my own breathing now, sharper and faster than before. I was suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was, lying there with my back turned to the empty side of the bed. The sheets that had felt warm and safe a few seconds earlier now felt like something trapping me in place. Finally, I turned around. There was no one there. The other side of the bed was empty. The sheets were not pulled back in any obvious way. There was no shape under the blanket, no person crouched beside the bed, no shadow standing in the room. Still, I jumped up and searched the whole bedroom. I checked the floor, the corners, under the bed, behind the door, inside the closet, anywhere a person could possibly hide. I knew it was ridiculous even while I was doing it, because I had heard the sound right there in the bed, not somewhere across the room. But fear does not care about logic. When you hear someone breathing behind you and you know you live alone, you check everything. There was nobody there. The room was empty. The apartment was quiet. And I was standing there in my sleep clothes with my heart racing, trying to convince myself that I had just experienced some kind of half-asleep hallucination. Ordinarily, that is exactly what I would have called it. A hypnagogic hallucination. People hear strange things when they are about to fall asleep. A voice, a knock, music, someone calling their name, the sound of something moving. I knew that. I had read about it before. If that had been the only strange thing that had ever happened in that apartment, I probably would have laughed at myself the next morning and let it go. But it was not the only strange thing. That sound in the bed lined up with about 10 other things that had happened in the apartment. Things that were harder to explain when I put them all together. None of them were huge on their own. They were not like something from a movie where furniture flies across the room or ghostly faces appear in mirrors. They were small things, quiet things, the kind of things that make you pause, listen, and then try to talk yourself out of being afraid. But after a while, those small things started stacking up, and the apartment began to feel less like a normal place and more like a place I was sharing with something I could not see. For a brief time, I had a flatmate staying with me. She was not there long, but she stayed long enough to notice something was off. Early on, she asked me if I was moving furniture in the middle of the night. At first, I did not even understand what she meant. She said she kept hearing scraping sounds while she was trying to sleep, like furniture being dragged across the floor. It was loud enough and regular enough that it had been keeping her up. I told her I had not been moving anything. I had been asleep. She looked confused, and honestly, so was I. The sound she described was not something I could easily explain. My apartment was not huge, and there was not some empty room where furniture could just move around. If I had been awake and dragging a chair or table, she would have known. If a neighbor was moving something, maybe that could explain it. But she was convinced it sounded like it was coming from inside our apartment. I wanted to dismiss it as building noise because older apartments can carry sound in weird ways. A chair scraping upstairs can sound like it is right beside you. Pipes can groan. People in other units can be louder than they realize. But I remember the way she asked me, and I remember how serious she looked. She was not being dramatic. She was tired and annoyed because something had been keeping her awake, and she thought it was me. Then there was the time my boyfriend and I came home together and heard a door close inside the apartment as we entered. That one still bothers me because we were both wide awake. There was no half-asleep state to blame. We had been out, and when we got back, we opened the apartment door and stepped inside. Right as we came in, we heard the clear sound of an internal door closing somewhere inside the apartment. Not a creak, not a pop, not a soft movement from the building. It sounded like a door had been opened and someone had just pulled it shut. We froze. There is a very specific kind of fear that hits when you think someone might be inside your home. It is not the same as being scared of a ghost. It is more immediate, more physical. Your mind jumps straight to intruder, burglar, stranger, danger. My boyfriend and I looked at each other, and I could tell he had heard it exactly the same way I had. We did not brush it off. We searched the whole place. Every room was empty. No one was inside. No windows were open. Nothing looked stolen. Nothing looked disturbed. But the strangest part was that we could not even find a closed internal door that made sense. It was not like the bathroom door had slammed shut or a bedroom door had clicked closed and we could point to it. There was no obvious door that had just closed. It was as if we had heard the sound of a door closing, but the apartment refused to show us which door it had been. That was when the apartment started to feel watched. I had already had that feeling before, but after the door incident, it became harder to ignore. I would be sitting in my living room, reading or watching something, and suddenly I would feel like someone was standing just out of sight. Not always in a threatening way. For me, it was mostly a quiet feeling, almost like being observed by someone who was curious. It did not always feel bad. Sometimes it felt strangely gentle, like something was nearby but not trying to hurt me. I know that probably sounds strange, because being watched should be frightening, and sometimes it was. But most of the time, for me, it did not feel aggressive. My boyfriend felt it too, but for him it was different. He said the feeling he got in my apartment was not calm or protective. To him, it felt hostile. Aggressive, like whatever was there did not want him in the space. He would get tense for no clear reason. He did not like being there alone. He would sometimes look toward corners or doorways the same way I did, but with more fear and discomfort. I noticed it. He tried to be reasonable about it, but he could not shake the feeling that the apartment did not like him. At the time, I did not know what to think. Part of me wondered if we were feeding off each other's fear. Once one person says a place feels strange, it is easy for the other person to start feeling it too. But this was not only coming from me. My flatmate had heard furniture scraping. My boyfriend and I had both heard the door. I had heard breathing in my bed. And my boyfriend, who was not someone I thought would invent things just to scare himself, felt something there too. The worst thing happened when my boyfriend took a nap at my place while I was out. He was in the same bed where I had heard the breathing. I was not home at the time, so he was alone in the apartment. He decided to lie down and sleep for a while. I do not remember exactly where I was, but I remember what he told me afterward very clearly because it scared him badly. He said he was lying there, resting or half asleep, when something rested a hand on his side. Not a vague pressure, not the blanket shifting, a hand. He felt it clearly enough that in that strange, sleepy state, he reacted like it belonged to a person. He actually linked hands with whatever it was. He said he felt fingers. He said he held them. And then, in the middle of that, he was hit by the strongest feeling that he was going to die. The way he described it was not casual. It was not like he woke up and said, "That was weird." He was shaken. He felt like something had touched him, and once he made contact with it, the feeling became unbearable. It was not just fear. It was a deep physical certainty that something terrible was about to happen to him. Like his body knew before his mind did that he needed to get away from it. When he told me, I did not know how to respond. Part of me wanted to comfort him and say it was sleep paralysis or a dream. That would have been the easy answer. People can feel touches when they are falling asleep or waking up. They can feel pressure, hear voices, see figures, and be completely convinced something is in the room with them. But again, it was not one isolated event. It happened in the same bed where I had heard breathing behind me. It happened in the same apartment where my flatmate heard furniture scraping and where we both heard a door close. It happened in a place where we both already felt watched. And somehow, through all of it, I never saw anything clearly. That might be the most frustrating part. I never saw a full figure standing in the hall. I never saw a face at the foot of the bed. I never saw a hand reach out from the darkness. The most I ever saw were shadows out of the corner of my eye. Quick movements that disappeared when I turned my head. A shape slipping past the doorway. A dark blur near the edge of my vision. The kind of thing you can always explain away if you want to. Maybe it was my hair, or a reflection, or a shadow from outside. Or just my tired eyes playing tricks on me. Nothing ever stayed long enough for me to point and say, "There, that is it." But the apartment still felt occupied. It was not every moment. I could go through normal days there. I could cook, shower, work, watch TV, and live my life. There were times when I felt completely fine. But then, out of nowhere, the atmosphere would shift. The air would feel heavier. The room would feel less empty. I would get that feeling again, like attention had turned toward me. Sometimes I would look up for no reason, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway. There would be no one there, but the feeling would stay. Over time, my boyfriend and I started forming our own strange little theory about the place. We came to believe that the apartment was haunted by something that liked me, but did not like him. It sounds almost funny when I say it that way, but that is genuinely how it felt. With me, the presence felt mostly benign, not exactly friendly in the normal sense, but not hateful. It watched me. It startled me. It made itself known sometimes, but I never felt like it wanted to hurt me. With him, it was different. He felt threatened. He felt unwanted. The hand on his side felt like something testing him or warning him, and the feeling that he was going to die was not something either of us could easily ignore. I do not know why that would be. Maybe if there was something there, it had attached itself to the apartment before I moved in. Maybe it liked the quiet routine of my life and saw my boyfriend as an intruder. Maybe it was protective in some twisted way. Maybe it did not like men. Maybe it did not like anyone who stayed too close to me. Or maybe that is just the story we built around a series of strange events because our brains needed a pattern. I know how humans work. We connect dots. We make meaning. We turn random things into a narrative so they feel less random. But even knowing that, the pattern felt real. The apartment never gave me one huge dramatic event that proved anything. It gave me little moments that stayed under my skin. A breath behind me in bed, a rustle of sheets where no body should have been, scraping furniture in the night while I slept, a door closing inside an empty apartment, a hand resting on my boyfriend's side, shadows that vanished when I turned my head, a feeling of being watched that both of us felt, but in different ways. For a while, I lived with it. I did not run out immediately or refuse to sleep there. Life is strange like that. You can experience something you cannot explain and still have to wake up the next day, go to work, pay rent, wash dishes, and answer messages. The haunting, if that is what it was, became part of the apartment's background. It was frightening, but also weirdly familiar. I learned the moods of the place. I learned which rooms felt heavier at certain times. I learned when to ignore the feeling of being watched and when to leave a light on. I learned to accept that I might never understand what was happening. Eventually, I moved out. I moved in with my boyfriend, and honestly, it felt like the right time. Part of it was practical. Our relationship had reached that point, and it made sense for us to live together. But part of me also felt like I was leaving behind something that had been sharing my space for a long time. I know that sounds strange, but by then the apartment did not feel like just walls and furniture. It felt like there was a presence there, and even though it had scared me, I did not feel right leaving without acknowledging it. So before I left, I gave my ghost protector a goodbye gift. I left a candle. I do not even fully know why I thought of it that way as a ghost protector. Maybe because whatever was there never seemed to truly harm me. Maybe because it seemed more bothered by my boyfriend than by me. Maybe because, in some strange way, I had come to see it as something that watched over the apartment, even if it did not always do so in a comforting way. Leaving the candle felt like a thank you and a goodbye at the same time. A small gesture to whatever had been there with me, whether it was real in the way people usually mean real, or real only in the way fear and memory can be real. After I moved out, I kept thinking about the breathing in the bed. That moment is still the one that comes back the clearest. The apartment had many strange moments, but that one was so intimate that it stayed with me differently. Hearing a door close in another room is frightening, but you can put distance between yourself and the sound. Hearing furniture scrape at night is disturbing, but it happens somewhere beyond you. But hearing someone breathe behind you in your own bed is different. It means the impossible is not across the room or down the hallway. It is inches away from your back. It is under the same sheets. It is sharing the place where you are supposed to be safest. I still do not know what I heard that night. Maybe it was a hypnagogic hallucination, just like I first thought. Maybe the scraping was neighbors, the door was a weird echo, the shadows were tricks of light, and my boyfriend's experience was some form of sleep paralysis. Maybe every single event had its own normal explanation, and we only turned it into a haunting because they happened in the same apartment. That is possible. I am not blind to that. But I also know how it felt to live there. I know how the apartment could feel empty one minute and watch the next. I know how my boyfriend's entire mood changed when he was alone there. I know how my flatmate asked me about noises I did not make. I know how clearly we both heard that door close when no one was inside. I know how terrified my boyfriend was after feeling that hand on his side. And I know the sound of breathing behind me was not soft enough to be nothing. People can tell me it was imagination. And maybe they are right. But if it was imagination, it was shared by more than one person. If it was coincidence, it was a long chain of coincidences. If it was just an old apartment, then that old apartment knew exactly how to make itself feel alive. I have lived in other places since then, and none of them have felt like that. Other homes make noises. Other homes have shadows. Other homes feel lonely at night. But that apartment had a presence to it, something hard to describe unless you have felt it yourself. It felt like someone was there, not always visible, not always active, but aware. Watching, waiting, sometimes gentle with me, sometimes angry with him. And in the end, that is what we concluded. The apartment was haunted by something that liked me, but was not a fan of my boyfriend. Maybe it was attached to the place. Maybe it was attached to me. Maybe it only wanted to be noticed. I do not know. I moved out recently to start a new life with him, and when I shut the door on that place for the last time, I did not feel only relief. I felt like I was leaving someone behind. So I left the candle, a goodbye gift for whatever had been there in the dark, breathing behind me, scraping in the night, closing doors, touching the person it did not want near me, and watching from the corners where I could never quite see it. I hope it understood. My family and I were in the middle of a long, strange move that already didn't feel real even before anything unusual happened. This was during the pandemic, when everything already felt off, like the world had quietly shifted into something unfamiliar. We had decided to drive across the country in an RV, going all the way from Georgia to Oregon. It sounded like an adventure at first, something almost exciting, but after days on the road, long stretches of empty highway, and the constant feeling of being far away from anything normal, it started to feel more isolating than exciting. The roads got quieter the further west we went, the towns got smaller, and the spaces between them stretched wider and wider until it felt like we were just floating through emptiness. By the time we reached New Mexico, that feeling had settled deep into me. There's something about that part of the country that feels different, especially at night. The land is open in a way that makes you feel small, like there's nothing to protect you and nowhere to hide. We had pulled off the main highway, somewhere about 20 or 30 miles north of I-40 and around the same distance east of Albuquerque. It wasn't a proper campground, not the kind you'd find listed on maps or recommended by travelers. It was more like a private RV encampment, a patch of land someone owned where a few scattered RVs were parked, spaced out far enough that you couldn't really see the people inside them. It was quiet. Too quiet. That night, everyone else in my family had gone to sleep. It was already late, past 1 in the morning, but I've always been a night person. I don't get tired the way others do, especially when I'm somewhere unfamiliar. I like to stay up, read, think, just exist in that stillness. So I grabbed a book and stepped outside the RV. The air was cool in that dry desert way, and the sky was clearer than anything I'd ever seen back home. There were so many stars, it almost didn't look real, like someone had painted them on. I sat down in one of those fold-out camping chairs and started reading. For a while, everything felt calm, peaceful even. There was no wind, no distant sounds of traffic, nothing but the occasional faint noise of insects or something moving far off in the dark. The kind of silence that presses against your ears. I don't know how long I had been sitting there when I noticed the headlights. At first, it was just a faint glow in the distance, far enough away that it barely registered. But something about it pulled my attention. Out there, in that kind of emptiness, any movement stands out. I lifted my head from the book and looked toward the road. It was a country road, not even paved in some places, running past the edge of the property. I hadn't seen a single car come by since we got there, so seeing headlights at that hour immediately felt strange. The lights were moving slowly, bouncing slightly as the vehicle made its way along the uneven road. I remember watching them without really thinking anything of it at first. Just curious. It's weird how your brain works like that. You notice something unusual, but you don't question it right away. You just observe. Then something moved closer to me, inside the reach of those headlights. About 40 or 50 feet away from where I was sitting, there was a wire fence marking the edge of the property. Beyond that, it was just open land stretching into darkness. As the headlights swept across that area, they briefly lit up something moving near the fence. At first, it looked completely normal, just an animal running. My first thought was that it was a coyote. That made sense. We were in New Mexico, out in the middle of nowhere. Coyotes are common out there, especially at night. It was moving fast, low to the ground, the way you'd expect. The shape, the size, the movement, it all fit. I remember feeling almost relieved that it was something familiar, something explainable. But then it did something that I still can't make sense of. Without slowing down, without stopping, without even hesitating, it stood up. Not in a clumsy way, not like an animal losing balance or reacting to something. It was smooth, fluid. One moment it was running on 4 legs, and the next it was upright, on 2 legs, still moving forward at the same speed. I froze. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I just watched. The headlights caught it just enough to make out the shape clearly, and that's what made it worse. If it had been darker, if I had only seen a shadow or a vague outline, I might have convinced myself later that I imagined it. But the light was there. It outlined the body, the movement, the posture. It wasn't right. The proportions looked wrong for anything I knew. It still had the general shape of a coyote, but the way it stood, the way it ran on 2 legs, it didn't match any natural movement I had ever seen. Its front legs, arms I guess, in that moment, hung differently. Not like an animal trying to balance, but almost like they belonged there. Like that was how it was meant to move. And the speed didn't change. That's the part that sticks with me the most. It didn't stumble or slow down when it stood up. It just kept going, as if switching from 4 legs to 2 was nothing, like it had done it 1,000 times before. I felt this sudden, overwhelming sense that I wasn't supposed to be seeing it. It's hard to explain that feeling if you've never had it before. It's not just fear. It's deeper than that. It's like your brain is telling you that something is wrong on a level you can't fully understand. Like you've accidentally stepped outside the rules of how things are supposed to work. For a second, I thought maybe I was tired, that my eyes were playing tricks on me. But I wasn't sleepy. I had been wide awake, reading, fully aware of my surroundings. And I knew what I saw. The thing kept moving, disappearing out of the reach of the headlights and back into the darkness. The car passed by shortly after, its lights sweeping across the empty land, but there was nothing there anymore. Just the fence, the ground, and the same quiet stillness as before. I didn't wait to see anything else. I stood up immediately, grabbed my book without even closing it properly, and walked straight back into the RV. I didn't run, but I moved faster than normal, trying not to think too much about what I had just seen. Inside, everything felt too small, too enclosed. My family was asleep, completely unaware, breathing softly, like nothing had happened. For a moment, I thought about waking someone up, telling them what I saw, asking if it made any sense. But I didn't, because I already knew it wouldn't. What would I even say? That I saw a coyote stand up and run like a person? It sounded ridiculous, even in my own head. And yet, I couldn't shake the certainty that it had happened exactly the way I remembered it. I sat there for a long time, just staring at nothing, listening to every little sound outside. Every creak of the arv, every faint noise in the distance made my heart jump. I kept expecting to hear something near the door or the window, like it had followed me, like it knew I had seen it. But nothing came. The night stretched on, slow and heavy. I didn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. That moment when it stood up. That unnatural shift in movement. It replayed over and over in my mind, each time feeling just as wrong as the first. When morning finally came, everything looked normal again. The sun was up, the land looked empty and harmless, like it had the night before. If I had seen the place like that first, I never would have thought anything strange could happen there. I didn't tell anyone right away. Part of me didn't want to say it out loud, like speaking it would make it more real, and another part of me worried that I'd start doubting myself if I tried to explain it. It's easier, in a strange way, to hold on to something like that quietly, without testing it against someone else's disbelief. But even now, I know what I saw. I didn't imagine it. I didn't misinterpret it. There was something out there that night, something that didn't move the way it was supposed to, something that existed just long enough for me to see it, and then disappear. And the worst part isn't just that it happened, it's the feeling that came with it, that quiet, creeping realization that maybe there are things out there we're not meant to understand, things that exist just outside the edges of what we consider normal. That night, sitting alone under that wide, endless sky, I think I saw one of them. I used to live in a small apartment, the kind of place where every sound feels closer than it should, like the walls carry things a little too well. It wasn't a bad place, just quiet in a way that could sometimes feel heavy, especially late at night. One night, I was asleep when I heard a knock at my door. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just a normal knock, like someone politely trying to get my attention. It felt real enough that it pulled me out of sleep immediately. I remember getting up, still half asleep, and walking to the door without really thinking about it. Everything felt normal. I didn't question why someone would be knocking that late. I just reacted. I opened the door, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nobody. The hallway outside was empty, completely still. No footsteps, no sound of someone leaving, nothing. And then I woke up. This time I was back in my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out if I had actually gotten up or if it had just been a dream. Before I could fully process it, I heard the knock again. Same sound. Same rhythm. Calm, deliberate, my heart started beating a little faster. But I still convinced myself it was real. Maybe I had imagined the first part. Maybe I had just been dreaming. So I got up again. Everything felt exactly the same as before. The same quiet apartment, the same dim light, the same feeling of being pulled toward the door. I walked over and opened it. Nobody. The hallway was empty again. No movement, no sign that anyone had been there at all. That's when the unease started to creep in. Not panic yet, just a quiet sense that something wasn't right. And then I woke up. Again, this time I didn't move right away. I stayed in bed for a second, trying to ground myself, trying to understand what was happening. It felt like I had already gone through the same moment twice, like I was stuck in a loop. I could still remember the feeling of opening the door and seeing nothing. It lingered in a way that dreams usually don't. Then I heard the knock again. At that point, it felt less like a coincidence and more like something intentional. My whole body felt tense, like I knew what was coming but couldn't stop it. I got out of bed one more time, slower this time, more aware. The apartment felt different now, heavier, quieter than before. I walked to the door, hesitated for a second, and then opened it. This time, there was someone there. A delivery guy stood right in front of me, his hand raised, just about to knock. For a split second, neither of us moved. It was like I had caught him mid-action, like I had opened the door at the exact moment before he made contact. And then I actually woke up. For real this time. I was back in bed, the room exactly how it should be, but my heart was racing. It took me a few moments to fully accept that everything that had just happened was a dream, but it didn't feel like one. It felt layered, like I had been waking up inside another dream over and over again, each time thinking I was finally awake. I only actually woke up once, but it felt like I had gone through that moment multiple times. I didn't sleep much after that. Years passed, and I mostly forgot about it. Or at least I pushed it into the back of my mind as one of those strange things that doesn't really have an explanation. Life moved on, things changed, and eventually I ended up living in a house in Washington. That place felt completely different from the apartment. More open, more alive, surrounded by a small, quiet neighborhood where everyone more or less kept to themselves. That's when the second set of strange things started happening. At that point, I had 3 cats. They were all very different from each other, which made it easy to tell them apart at a glance. One was a small, gray, short-haired girl that I had gotten from a farm. She was calm, friendly, and always seemed comfortable around people. The second was a large black and white short-haired male from a shelter, more laid back, but still affectionate in his own way. The third was a long-haired girl, really fluffy, also from a shelter, with a personality that stood out immediately. You couldn't mistake her for anything else. At first, they were all indoor cats. We kept them inside, made sure they were safe, and everything was fine. But over time, they started slipping out occasionally. At first, it was accidental, just small escapes here and there, but they always came back. Eventually, we gave in a little and allowed them to go outside during the day. It felt like a compromise. They could explore, do whatever cats do, and then they'd come home in the evening and sleep inside. It became a routine. One day, I came home like I usually did, pulling into the driveway and walking up to the front door. Sitting right there, waiting for me, was the little gray cat from the farm. She looked exactly how she always did. Same size, same color, same calm, friendly expression. She came right up to me, like she always did, clearly expecting to be let inside. There was nothing unusual about it at all. I picked her up without thinking, carried her inside, and set her down. It felt like a completely normal moment, something that had happened dozens of times before. Then, my wife said something that stopped me cold. She pointed toward the living room and said our gray cat was already inside, sitting on the sofa. I remember turning my head slowly, not really wanting to believe it, and there she was, sitting there, exactly as described. Calm, relaxed, like she had been there the whole time. I looked back at the cat I had just brought in. Same size, same color, same everything. The only difference was that this one was a male. It didn't make any sense. There was no logical explanation for it. I had just picked up what I thought was our cat from the doorstep, but somehow our actual cat had already been inside. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to process it, trying to find some detail that would explain it away. But there wasn't one. That was the first time. Months later, something similar happened again, this time with a black and white cat. I came home and saw him sitting on the porch, up at the top of the stairs that led to our front door. He looked exactly like he always did, same markings, same size, same posture. I walked up the stairs toward him, expecting the usual reaction. Normally, he'd just stay there or come closer, maybe rub against my leg. But this time, as soon as I got close, he completely freaked out. He bolted, running down the stairs and away from the house like he was terrified. I remember being confused more than anything. It wasn't like him at all. I went inside, still trying to understand what had just happened, and there he was, sitting calmly in the living room like he had never left. Again, no explanation. The third time was with the long-haired cat. I pulled into the driveway and saw her near the other car, just hanging out like she sometimes did. Same fluffy coat, same size, same everything. I got out of the car and walked toward her, expecting her to come over like she usually would. Instead, she ran. Not just casually moving away, but full-on running, like she didn't recognize me at all. That alone was strange, because she was usually very comfortable around me. I tried calling her, but she wouldn't come back, so I went inside. And there she was, inside the house with the other two cats, exactly where she should have been. By that point, it wasn't just a weird coincidence anymore. It had happened 3 separate times, with 3 completely different cats, all of them looking identical to mine, all of them appearing around my house specifically, and all of them behaving just differently enough to make it clear they weren't the same animals. The strangest part was how close they were in appearance. It wasn't like seeing a similar cat and getting confused for a second. These were exact matches in size, color, and overall look. The only consistent difference was that the duplicates were all male, while 2 of mine were female. I lived in a small neighborhood. It wasn't packed with houses, and I never saw other cats roaming around that looked like mine. The chances of 3 different, nearly identical cats just happening to appear around my house at different times felt incredibly low. Even now, I can't fully explain it. It's one of those things that just sits in the back of your mind, refusing to fit into any normal explanation. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe there's some simple answer I never found. But the way it happened, the timing, the repetition, the exactness of those animals, it all felt too precise to ignore. Between that and the dreams from years before. I sometimes wonder if there are moments where reality just slips a little, not in a big, obvious way, but in small, quiet ways that you only notice if you're paying attention. Like seeing something you weren't meant to see. or stepping into a moment that doesn't quite belong. I don't have an answer for any of it. I just know what I experienced and how real it felt at the time. And sometimes that's the part that stays with you the longest. Forgive me for stepping in for just a moment. If you've only recently found your way here, then welcome. I'm glad you came. If these stories are keeping you company tonight, consider subscribing to Crowvane Manor. New stories arrive here often, the kind that stay with you long after the night is over. And if you tap the bell, you won't have to go looking. The next one will find you on its own. Thank you for being here. Now, let's return to where we left off. About a decade ago, I was staying alone at my parents' house while they were away on vacation. It wasn't the first time I had been there by myself, and it wasn't a place that ever really felt creepy or uncomfortable. It was just a normal house, in a normal neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. Still, being alone in a house that wasn't technically mine always carried a slightly different feeling, especially at night. There's something about empty rooms and quiet hallways that feels more noticeable when you're the only person there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I don't remember exactly why, but I just wasn't tired, even though it was already late. I ended up lying in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence, hoping I'd eventually drift off. But it wasn't happening. After a while, I gave up trying and decided to go downstairs. I figured watching some TV might help me relax enough to fall asleep. When I got to the living room, I didn't bother looking for anything specific. I just turned the TV on and left it on whatever channel it landed on. It happened to be one of those true crime shows, the kind that reenacts real cases with dramatic narration and slow, unsettling music. The episode that was playing was about a woman who had been murdered in her own home. I remember thinking it probably wasn't the best thing to watch alone in the middle of the night, but I didn't feel like changing it. I just let it play in the background while I sat there, half watching, half zoning out. The house was completely quiet aside from the TV. Every now and then there'd be a faint creak from somewhere, the kind of normal settling noises houses make, but nothing that really stood out. At least, not at first. About 20 minutes into the show, I heard something from the basement. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct enough to catch my attention immediately. It sounded like movement, like something mechanical shifting or starting up. At first, I just sat there, listening, trying to figure out what it could be. My parents had a treadmill down there, along with some other exercise equipment, but there was no reason for any of it to be on. The noise came again, a little clearer this time. I remember telling myself it was probably nothing. Maybe something had shifted. Maybe I was just imagining it because of the show I was watching. Still, the curiosity got to me, and I decided to go check it out. I stood up, muted the TV, and walked toward the basement door. The moment I opened it, the sound became unmistakable. The treadmill was running. I slowly walked down the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The basement lights were already on, so I could see everything clearly. There, right in the middle of the room, the treadmill belt was moving at a slow, steady pace, like it was set for a casual walk. No one was there. I just stood at the bottom of the stairs for a few seconds, staring at it, trying to process what I was seeing. My first instinct was to find a logical explanation. Maybe there was some kind of timer or automatic setting I didn't know about. Maybe it had malfunctioned somehow and turned itself on. I walked over to it carefully, almost expecting it to stop on its own as I got closer. It didn't. The belt kept moving at the same steady pace, completely unaffected by my presence. I looked at the control panel, trying to see if anything made sense, but it just looked like it was on, like someone had pressed the button to start it. Eventually, I reached out and turned it off. The moment it stopped, the basement fell completely silent again. I stood there for a little longer, listening, waiting to see if anything else would happen. Nothing did. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The treadmill was just sitting there now, completely still, like it had never been on at all. I told myself it was just a malfunction. That had to be it. Machines do weird things sometimes. It didn't mean anything. Trying to convince myself of that, I went back upstairs. I unmuted the TV and sat back down, but I wasn't really paying attention to it anymore. The show kept playing, the narrator's voice describing something about the crime, but it all felt distant. My mind kept going back to the treadmill, replaying the moment I saw it moving on its own. I kept listening for any more sounds from the basement, but everything stayed quiet. For a few minutes, I started to relax a little. I told myself I was overreacting, that there was a simple explanation, and that I just needed to stop thinking about it. The house felt calm again, just like before. And then, all the lights went out. Not just one room, not just a flicker. Every light in the house shut off at once. The TV went dark. The room was instantly swallowed by complete darkness. For a split second, I just sat there, frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. A power outage was the obvious explanation, but the timing felt wrong. It had been completely normal just seconds before, and now everything was gone. The silence felt heavier than before. I didn't wait around to figure it out. The fear hit all at once, sharp and overwhelming, and I reacted without thinking. I got up and ran. I didn't bother grabbing anything, didn't try to check the breaker, didn't try to rationalize it. I just headed straight for the door, opened it, and got out of the house as fast as I could. Once I was outside, the air felt different, like I could finally breathe again. I moved a little further away from the house, turning back to look at it. It was completely dark, no lights, no signs of anything unusual from the outside. Just a quiet, empty house sitting there, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment, my heart still racing, trying to calm down enough to think clearly. Then I pulled out my phone and called my dad. When he answered, I tried to explain what had just happened. But even as I was saying it, it sounded strange. A treadmill turning on by itself, the lights going out right after. It didn't sound convincing, even to me. He listened, but I could tell he didn't really believe anything was wrong. He said it was probably just a power issue, maybe something with the wiring, maybe a coincidence with the treadmill malfunctioning at the same time. He told me not to worry, that houses have problems sometimes, and that I was probably just spooked from being alone and watching that kind of show so late at night. Logically, what he said made sense. But it didn't feel right. The way it happened, the order of events, the timing, it all felt too connected. First, the noise. Then, the treadmill running by itself. Then, just when I was trying to calm down, the lights going out completely. It didn't feel random. Eventually, after standing outside for a while, I worked up the nerve to go back in. I didn't want to, but I didn't really have another option. I opened the door slowly, half expecting something else to happen the moment I stepped inside. But everything was normal again. The power was back. The lights were on. The TV was off, but everything else looked exactly the same as it had before. I checked the basement again, carefully this time. The treadmill was off, just sitting there like nothing had happened. No sounds, no movement, nothing. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake until morning, keeping all the lights on, listening to every little noise, expecting something else to happen. But nothing did. The house stayed quiet, calm, completely ordinary. Even now, I still think about that night sometimes. I've tried to explain it in different ways, tried to break it down into logical pieces, but something about it always feels off. Maybe it really was just a coincidence. A malfunction followed by a brief power outage. That's the simplest explanation, and probably the most reasonable one. But the way it all happened, back to back, in the middle of the night, while I was alone in that house, it left a feeling that never really went away. It's hard to describe, but it's like for a brief moment. Something didn't follow the rules it was supposed to. And I just happened to be there when it did. About 10 years ago, my neighbors went on vacation and left me in charge of their house. They trusted me enough to look after the place while they were gone, which mostly meant feeding the pets, checking in, and making sure everything stayed normal until they came back. As a thank you, they also let me use their beautiful in-ground pool whenever I wanted. At the time, that felt like a pretty great deal. They were good to me, and on the surface, they seemed like the kind of family that had everything. They had a huge, nice house, money, beautiful yard, and the kind of pool most people would love to have. From the outside, it looked like the sort of life people dream about. But anyone who lived near them knew things were not as perfect as they looked. That family had a lot of problems. They had money, but they never seemed happy. There was always tension around that house, even if you could not always point to one specific thing. The police were called there more than once. The dad was having affairs. The mom got really sick and eventually died. The kids had their own issues too, and the whole family seemed to carry this heavy, unhappy energy around them. I did not understand all of it at the time, and I was not part of their private life, but living nearby, you notice things. You notice when a house that should feel warm and comfortable always seems full of stress. You notice when people have everything and still seem miserable. I do not know if any of that matters to what happened, but I have always wondered if it did. Since they had told me I could use the pool while they were away, I naturally had my girlfriends come over at night to swim. It felt harmless. We were not breaking into anything. I was supposed to be there taking care of the house and pets, and they had given me permission to use the pool. During the day, it was nice. But at night, it felt even better in a way. There is something about swimming at night that feels private and exciting, especially when you are younger. The world is quiet, the air is cooler, and the water looks darker and deeper than it does during the day. It feels like you are doing something slightly forbidden, even when you are allowed to be there. That night was perfect outside. It was black and still, with no wind and not a cloud in the sky. The kind of night where everything seems frozen in place. No branches moving, no leaves rustling, no clouds passing over the moon, just open sky and silence. We wanted to go for a night swim, so we went over there by ourselves. Nothing about the house seemed strange at first. It was quiet because the family was away, but that was expected. The yard was empty. The pets had been taken care of. The pool was waiting there in the darkness, calm and black. We could not figure out how to turn on the pool lights. We tried for a little while, looking around for the switch or whatever system controlled them, but we could not get them on. It did not seem like a big problem, though, because the moon was bright in the sky. It was bright enough to see the shape of the pool and the yard around us. The light from the moon reflected on the surface of the water, and because there was no wind, the pool was completely still. The water was pitch black, but it had this perfect mirror look to it, like a sheet of dark glass with the moon shining on it. It was beautiful, but also a little strange. Still water at night can look peaceful, but it can also look like it is hiding something. The pool was shaped like a peanut. One end was the shallow end, about 4 feet deep, and the other end was the deeper end. At the deep end, there was a water slide. During the day, it was the fun part of the pool, the place where people would climb up, slide down, splash into the water, and laugh. At night, with the lights off and the moon reflecting over everything, the slide looked different. It stood there at the end of the pool like a dark shape, and the water below it looked deeper than it probably was. The whole deep end seemed farther away from us, even though it was still part of the same pool. We stayed mostly in the shallow end. That felt more comfortable, and honestly, we were just enjoying the night. We swam for about half an hour, talking quietly, laughing a little and relaxing in the water. Everything felt normal. The water was calm around us except for the little waves we made when we moved. The yard around the pool stayed quiet. The house was dark. There was no wind. Nothing looked out of place. It was the kind of night that should have become a nice memory and nothing more. At some point, I walked up to my girlfriend and gave her a hug. We were standing in the shallow end, close together, arms around each other, just having a quiet moment. The water was around us. The moonlight was on the pool. And for a few seconds, everything felt peaceful. Then, while we were hugging, we both heard a noise coming from the deep end of the pool. At first, we thought it might be the water filter gurgling. That was the easiest explanation. Pools have systems, filters, pumps, jets, and all kinds of things that can make strange noises, especially if you do not know exactly how that particular pool works. Sometimes water gets pulled or pushed through pipes and makes a sucking, bubbling, or gurgling sound. So when the noise started, that was where my mind went first. It must be the filter. It must be something mechanical. But the noise was strange and loud, and the way it started was what startled us. It went from complete silence to that sound very quickly. There was no slow buildup, no soft little bubbling that became louder. It just suddenly began, cutting into the quiet night from the deep end. The sound did not feel like part of the pool. It felt like something had entered the silence. We both turned our heads toward the deep end at the same time. At the bottom of the water slide, in the water, there was the silhouette of a head sticking out. It was completely black, with no features, no face, no hair that I could clearly see, nothing that made it look like a specific person. But the shape was unmistakable. It looked exactly like a human head sticking out of the water, with a neck going down beneath the surface. It was positioned right there in the deep end, just below the water slide, where no one should have been. The dark shape rose from the black water like someone was standing or floating there, only showing their head and neck. The noise was coming directly from it. That was the worst part. If we had just seen a shape in the water, maybe we could have told ourselves it was a shadow, a pool toy, or something reflected from the slide. But the sound came from the same place as the shape. It was like heavy breathing, deep and mechanical, almost like Darth Vader. A harsh, strange, breath-like sound that did not belong in that quiet backyard. It was not a normal pool sound anymore. It was breathing. Or at least it sounded close enough to breathing that both of us understood it that way instantly. We stared at it for maybe 5 seconds at the most, but it felt much longer. Time changes when fear hits. 5 seconds becomes enough time for your mind to ask too many questions at once. Who is that? How did they get in the pool without us hearing them? Were they hiding in the deep end the whole time? Are they drowning? Are they trying to scare us? Is it a person? Is it not a person? Why is it not moving? Why does it sound like that? Why does it feel wrong? The visual was terrifying, but the hardest part to explain about the experience was the feeling we felt. Both of us felt it. Later, my girlfriend would describe the same feeling without me having to lead her toward it. It was a deep, gut-wrenching feeling in the stomach, like every part of your body suddenly knew that something was wrong and that you had to leave right now. It was not just fear from seeing something unexpected. It was stronger than that. It felt instinctive, like the kind of warning animals must feel when a predator is close. Every hair on the back of my neck stood up. My skin felt cold even though I was in the water. My body wanted to move before my mind had finished understanding what I was looking at. It almost felt like there was a sense of evil in the air. I know that is hard to explain without sounding dramatic. People use the word evil too easily sometimes. But that is the word that comes closest to the feeling. It was not just someone is in the pool. It was not just something scared us. It was a deep wrongness, a heavy and hateful feeling that seemed to come from the deep end with that shape in the water. It felt like the air around us had changed. The yard, the pool, the moonlight, everything suddenly felt unsafe. It was like the whole night had been still because something was waiting. We looked at the head in the water. Then we looked back at each other in confusion and fear. We did not speak. We did not need to. I could see from her face that she was seeing what I was seeing. This was not something only I had noticed. This was not my imagination. She saw the silhouette, too. She heard the breathing, too. She felt that same awful pull in her stomach, telling her something was badly wrong. Then we looked back toward the deep end. In that split second, the head was gone. There was nothing there. The water was still again. That made no sense. If it had been a person, they would have had to go under the water. If someone had ducked down, there should have been ripples, movement, bubbles, waves spreading through the deep end. The pool had been so still that even small movements showed on the surface. But where the head had been, there was nothing. No waves, no splashing, no sign that anything had just gone under. Just moonlight on the black surface of the pool. We were crouched or low in the shallow end, so we slowly stood up to see better. We wanted to know if someone was hiding under the water. That was the only normal explanation left. Maybe someone had somehow gotten into the pool without us knowing, popped their head up near the slide, made that breathing sound, then ducked under to scare us. It would have been horrifying, but at least it would be human. We stood up and looked hard into the deep end. There was no one in the pool with us. Nothing moved. No body below the surface. No bubbles rising. No shape swimming away. No waves hitting the sides. The deep end was empty, black, and calm. The moon still reflected on the water like a mirror. That was what made the scene so impossible. Something had been there, shaped exactly like a human head and neck, making a loud breathing noise. Then it vanished without disturbing the water. That was enough for us. We slowly moved toward the edge, trying not to panic too hard while we were still in the pool. I think both of us were afraid that if we moved too suddenly, something would come back or grab us from below. That sounds irrational, but fear does not care. When you have just seen a black head rise from the deep end and disappear, every inch of water around your legs feels dangerous. The shallow end did not feel safe anymore. The whole pool felt like it belonged to whatever we had seen. We got out, grabbed our towels, and ran across the street back to my parents' house. We did not stay to investigate. We did not walk around the deep end with a flashlight. We did not check behind the slide or look in the bushes. We did not go into the neighbor's house. We just left. There was no discussion, no debate, no attempt to prove we were being brave. We both knew we had to get away from that pool, and we did. Back at my parents' house, my girlfriend talked about it for maybe 10 minutes that night. We went over what we saw, what we heard, and how it felt. I think we were both trying to make sure the other person had experienced the same thing. When something impossible happens with another person, you need to compare details right away, because part of you is already afraid your own mind will start changing the memory. We both remembered the head. We both remembered the breathing. We both remembered the feeling in our stomachs. We both remembered looking away and looking back to find it gone. Then, after those 10 minutes, she would never let me bring it up again. That reaction always stayed with me. Some people want to talk about scary experiences over and over. They want to analyze them, laugh about them, tell friends, and turn them into stories. She did not. She wanted the opposite. It bothered her so deeply that she did not want it brought back into the room. If I tried to mention it later, she shut it down. That told me the experience had affected her more than she wanted to admit. She had felt the same wrongness I felt, and she did not want to revisit it. The family who owned the house continued on a downward spiral for years after that. Their problems did not stop when they came back from vacation. Things kept getting worse. The parents eventually got divorced and moved out. There was sickness, conflict, emotional damage, and all the issues that had already been building around them. Again, I do not know if any of that is connected to what we saw. I do not want to say for sure that some entity caused their family problems. Real people have real problems for real reasons, and money does not protect anyone from affairs, illness, depression, or broken relationships. But I have always questioned it. The feeling that came from that thing in the pool did not feel neutral. It did not feel like a random ghost drifting through the yard. It felt dark, heavy, almost hateful. And that house had always felt like it had something wrong around it, even before that night. The family had so much on the outside, but inside, they seemed miserable. After we saw the head in the pool, I could not help wondering if something was attached to them, something that fed off the chaos or helped cause it. Maybe that sounds strange, but when you feel that kind of evil in your stomach, you start thinking about things differently. What makes the question even stranger is what happened after they left. A new family moved into that house, and they seemed fine, drama-free. Normal, no constant police calls, no obvious downward spiral, no heavy cloud over the place that everyone could feel from the outside. The house became just a house again. That does not prove anything, of course. Different families have different lives. Maybe the old family's problems were entirely their own, and the new family simply had a healthier dynamic. That is probably the most practical explanation. But part of me still wonders if whatever was there left with them. Or maybe it had been attached to them all along. I still think about that pool sometimes. The black water, the moonlight, the deep end under the water slide, the head-shaped silhouette rising just above the surface. The breathing sound like something mechanical and alive at the same time. The way it vanished without ripples. The way the water went back to being perfectly still, as if nothing had happened. If only one of us had seen it, maybe I would have doubted the memory more. But we both saw it. We both heard it. We both felt that same awful warning deep inside us. That feeling is the part I can never explain to people properly. Seeing something strange is one thing. Your eyes can be fooled. Shadows can look like heads. Reflections can create shapes. Pool filters can make noises. Moonlight can change the way water looks. I understand all of that. I have tried to use all of that to explain it. But the feeling was not a shadow. The feeling was not a reflection. It was a full-body alarm that told both of us to leave immediately. It felt like standing too close to something that hated you. Maybe the pool filter did make the noise. Maybe a shadow from the water slide looked like a head. Maybe the moonlight and the shape of the pool created a strange visual effect. Maybe our fear turned a normal sound and a dark reflection into something bigger. But then why did we both feel the same overwhelming sense of evil? Why did it seem to come from the shape? Why did the head vanish in a split second? We looked away. Why were there no waves if something had gone under? Why did my girlfriend refuse to ever talk about it again after that night? Those are the questions that keep the memory alive. I do not have proof of anything. I do not have a picture. I do not have a recording of the sound. I only have the memory and the fact that someone else was there and experienced it with me. But sometimes that is enough to make a story stay with you. You can go years without thinking about it, then suddenly see moonlight on water or hear a strange breathing sound in a movie, and you are back there again. Back in that still black pool, back in the shallow end with your arms around someone, back to the exact second you both turn your heads and see something watching from the deep end. I do not know what we saw that night. I do not know if it was a person, a shadow, a spirit, an entity, or something attached to that family and their pain. I do not know if the pool was just the place where it showed itself or if it had been there all along. I only know that the night started perfectly calm, with no wind, no clouds, and a bright moon reflecting on still water. Then something appeared at the bottom of the water slide, shaped like a human head, black and featureless, making a heavy breathing sound that came from nowhere. We looked away for 1 second, looked back, and it was gone. No waves, no person, no explanation. Just the moonlight on the still pool and the feeling that something very wrong had noticed us.
When I was around 9 or 10 years old, I had an experience that, even though it wasn't supernatural, remains one of the scariest moments of my childhood. Looking back, I think what made it so frightening was the fact that it was completely real. There were no ghosts, no strange creatures, and no unexplained mysteries. Instead, it was the realization that sometimes the most terrifying situations come from ordinary people behaving in unpredictable ways. The incident happened during a family gathering at my aunt's house. She was hosting a dinner party, and as usual, the house was packed with relatives, friends, and neighbors. The atmosphere was warm and cheerful. Adults were gathered in different rooms, talking, laughing, and catching up with one another, while the kids moved between the backyard, living room, and kitchen, trying to entertain ourselves. My aunt's house sat on a hill overlooking the street. From the front yard, you could see the road below, along with a row of houses and several streetlights. It was a nice neighborhood, and nobody expected anything unusual to happen that evening. As the night went on, the party slowly began winding down. Some people had already started gathering their things and saying their goodbyes. Others were helping clean up after dinner. My brother and I were hanging around the living room, not really paying attention to the adults' conversations. Then we heard shouting. At first, it sounded distant, the kind of random noise you might hear coming from somewhere down the street. Most of us ignored it. A few moments later, however, the yelling became louder. The conversations inside the house began to slow as more people noticed it. The shouting didn't sound normal. It sounded angry. Several adults exchanged confused looks before someone decided to check outside. Naturally, curiosity spread through the house. One person went outside, then another. Before long, a large portion of the guests had gathered near the front of the property, trying to figure out what was happening. My brother and I followed the crowd. At that age, anything unusual immediately grabbed our attention. When we stepped outside, we saw the source of the noise. A man was standing across the street. Even though he wasn't directly on my aunt's property, he felt uncomfortably close. If you walked out through the garage and looked toward the left side of the road, there he was near one of the streetlights. Because the house sat on a hill, we were slightly elevated compared to the road below. Even so, there was no mistaking that he was focused on us. The man looked disheveled and agitated. He was yelling loudly. At first, it was difficult to understand exactly what he was saying. His words sounded scattered and aggressive. The more we listened, however, the more disturbing the situation became. He wasn't simply shouting random things. He was making threats. He repeatedly screamed that he was going to kill us. I remember feeling confused at first. As a child, I had never witnessed anything like this before. Part of me assumed it had to be some kind of joke. Another part of me could tell from the adults' reactions that it wasn't. The adults quickly began guiding everyone back inside the house. The atmosphere changed immediately. The cheerful feeling from the dinner party disappeared. Conversations became quieter. People started checking windows. Some guests locked doors, while others tried to figure out whether the man knew anyone at the gathering. Nobody seemed to recognize him. For a little while, things became quiet. Then, the yelling started again, louder this time. Several people cautiously looked outside once more. Curiosity and concern got the better of them. Eventually, a group of adults stepped outside to see what was happening. My brother and I followed again, despite probably being told not to. What we saw this time was much worse. The man was still there, but now he was holding a machete. Even as a child, I knew exactly what a machete was. The sight of that blade instantly changed everything. This wasn't just an angry person shouting anymore. Now there was a weapon involved. I remember seeing adults immediately become more serious. People who had previously seemed annoyed now looked genuinely concerned. The man continued yelling threats. He waved the machete around as he shouted. Then he began demonstrating how he was supposedly going to attack us. Every movement made the situation feel more dangerous. The reality that this was actually happening began sinking in. Among the adults present was my stepfather. He had spent many years working as a police officer before retiring. Because of his experience, he remained calmer than most of the people around him. While others stayed back, he attempted to reason with the man. I remember watching nervously as he spoke to him from a distance. At first, it seemed like he was trying to calm the situation down. Unfortunately, the man wasn't interested in listening. Instead, he suddenly began walking toward my stepfather. The sight immediately made everyone tense. As he approached, he repeatedly shouted the same phrase, "Are you going to shoot me?" over and over again. The question echoed through the street. "Are you going to shoot me?" Again and again and again. The repetition made the entire encounter feel surreal. My stepfather remained composed, but it was obvious that the situation was escalating. The man eventually stopped and moved back across the street. For a brief moment, it seemed like things might calm down. Instead, he resumed making threats. He started striking the nearby light post with the machete. The metallic clang echoed through the neighborhood. Each swing seemed designed to intimidate everyone watching. He wasn't just threatening people verbally anymore. He was physically demonstrating what he intended to do. As a child, I remember feeling frozen. I didn't fully understand everything that was happening, but I knew enough to realize it was serious. The adults clearly felt the same way. At that point, my brother and I were told to go back inside immediately. Unlike earlier, there was no room for argument. The adults wanted the children away from the situation. We reluctantly went back into the house. Even inside, however, we could still hear the shouting. Every loud yell made my stomach twist. The atmosphere inside the house was tense. People were talking quietly. Some stood near windows while trying not to make themselves obvious. Others were on the phone. At some point, the police were called. Everyone hoped officers would arrive quickly and bring the situation under control. Unfortunately, things didn't happen that way. By the time law enforcement reached the area, the man was already gone. Somehow, after making threats, waving a machete, and terrorizing an entire gathering of people, he managed to leave before officers arrived. According to what I later heard, he simply rode away on a bicycle. The image of someone causing that much fear and then casually leaving on a bike seemed almost absurd. Yet that's exactly what happened. Eventually, the immediate danger passed. The party was effectively over. Nobody felt much like celebrating anymore. People left shortly afterward, and everyone spent the rest of the night discussing what had happened. For years, I assumed that was the end of the story. Then I learned something even stranger. According to my aunt, the man eventually appeared in court regarding the incident. Everyone expected him to look exactly the way he had that night. Wild, disheveled, aggressive, the same intimidating person who had stood outside making threats with a machete. Instead, he apparently looked like an entirely different person. My aunt said he arrived clean and well-groomed. His hair was neatly slicked back. He wore a suit and tie. He appeared calm, composed, and completely sane. The transformation was so dramatic that it shocked the people who had witnessed the original incident. The image they remembered and the person standing in court seemed like two entirely different individuals. That detail always stuck with me. Not because it was supernatural, but because it reminded me how complicated people can be. Sometimes the most frightening situations aren't caused by monsters hiding in the dark. They're caused by ordinary people whose behavior suddenly becomes unpredictable. Looking back now, I realize how dangerous that night could have been. At the time, I was mostly curious. I wanted to see what was happening. I treated it almost like an exciting event unfolding in front of me. As an adult, I understand why everyone was so concerned. An angry stranger armed with a machete was making direct threats toward a house full of people. That isn't something to take lightly. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. The situation ended without violence. The police were eventually involved, and life moved on. But even now, years later, I can still picture that streetlight, the dark road below the hill, and the man standing there yelling into the night. I've heard plenty of ghost stories and paranormal encounters over the years, but honestly, some of the scariest memories don't involve anything supernatural at all. Sometimes reality is more than enough. And for a 9 or 10-year-old kid standing outside his aunt's house, watching a stranger swing a machete around while making threats, it was definitely one of the most frightening things I had ever experienced. Even now, it's a night I haven't forgotten. When I was around 7 years old, I had an experience that scared me so badly that I still remember it years later. Looking back, there are probably a dozen logical explanations for what I saw, but at the time, none of those explanations mattered. I was a kid, and from my perspective, I had just seen something that absolutely should not have existed. The strange part is that the memory has never really faded. Most childhood fears eventually become funny stories. The monster under the bed turns out to be a pile of clothes. The shadow in the hallway turns out to be a coat hanging on a chair. But this experience has always stayed with me because of how vivid it felt in that moment. At the time, my younger brother and I were spending an ordinary afternoon at home. It was one of those days where nothing exciting was happening. No friends were over. There were no video games we wanted to play, no movies we were interested in watching, and no plans for the day. We were bored out of our minds, the kind of boredom only kids can experience, where every minute feels like an hour and you're desperate for something, anything to do. We were both sitting on the couch when my brother suddenly came up with an idea. Let's play hide and seek. It wasn't exactly an exciting suggestion, but it was better than sitting around doing nothing. So I agreed. At the time, my grandmother was living with us. She and my mom didn't always get along very well, and on that particular day, they were in the middle of an argument. Their voices drifted through parts of the house while my brother and I prepared for our game. As kids, we didn't really pay much attention to it. We were more focused on making our game as fun as possible. Before we started, I ran to my bedroom and grabbed 2 glow sticks. Looking back, it was completely unnecessary. It wasn't even dark outside yet. There was still plenty of daylight coming through the windows. But in our minds, glow sticks made everything more exciting. They made ordinary games feel like adventures. I handed 1 glow stick to my brother and kept the other for myself. Immediately, the game felt more serious, at least to us. Now, there's something important you should know about me as a child. I absolutely loved scary stories. Most kids my age avoided horror stories before bed. I actively searched for them. I would listen to creepy stories, watch scary videos whenever I could, and imagine all sorts of spooky scenarios. The fear didn't bother me. In fact, I enjoyed it. There was something exciting about getting that little adrenaline rush while knowing I was still safe. Unfortunately, when you spend enough time filling your head with horror stories, your imagination tends to become very active, especially when you're 7 years old. Since my brother had suggested the game, I ended up being it. I stood in the living room covering my eyes while counting. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 60. I could hear my brother running through the house looking for a hiding spot. By the time I reached 60, everything had gone quiet. The hunt began. I started searching room by room. Some areas of the house were completely off limits. For example, my grandmother's room was a place neither of us was allowed to hide. My mother, on the other hand, didn't really care if we entered her room. So naturally, that was the first place I checked. I pushed open the door and looked around. Nothing. No brother. No movement. Just an empty room. I moved on. The next obvious place to search was my bedroom. Before I explain what happened, it's important to understand the layout of the room. When you entered through the doorway, there was a television positioned immediately to the right against the wall. Along the right-hand wall sat a bunk bed. Directly ahead was another bunk bed, and to the left was the doorway leading into a small bathroom. It was a fairly crowded room, with plenty of places for a kid to hide. As I stepped inside, I immediately spotted my brother, or at least I spotted where he was hiding. He wasn't very good at hide and seek. Part of his body was clearly visible behind the television. I remember almost laughing. I was already preparing to call out that I had found him. Then I looked toward the bathroom doorway, and everything changed. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. There was something positioned near the top of the bathroom entrance, not standing in the doorway, not inside the bathroom. Above it, the sight was so strange that it took me several seconds to understand what I was looking at. It appeared to be a head, just a head, a human-looking head attached to an impossibly long neck. The neck stretched downward into darkness, where I couldn't see the rest of whatever it belonged to. Long strands of hair hung around its face. The hair appeared dark and tangled. I remember staring at it in complete disbelief. Even now, I can still picture the image. The head seemed far too high to belong to a normal person. The proportions were completely wrong. The neck was too long. The positioning made no sense. For a brief moment, everything seemed frozen. My mind raced through possible explanations. Maybe it was clothing. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I wasn't seeing what I thought I was seeing. But none of those thoughts lasted very long. Fear took over. Instantly, the kind of fear that hits so hard, it feels physical. Every hair on my body stood up. My stomach dropped. My heart began hammering in my chest. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn around and get as far away from that room as possible. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. Then I remembered my brother. He was still hiding behind the television, and judging by the expression on his face, he had seen it too. I could tell he was scared. Really scared. The kind of scared where a child is trying not to cry, but is only seconds away from completely breaking down. For a moment, I found myself caught between two feelings: terror and responsibility. I know that sounds dramatic, considering I was only 7 years old, but that's exactly how it felt. I wanted to escape. At the same time, I couldn't leave my brother behind. The thing, or whatever I thought it was, remained perfectly still near the bathroom doorway, watching, or at least it felt like it was watching. I didn't wait to find out. I rushed across the room toward my brother. I grabbed his arm as quickly as I could. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. The panic on both our faces said enough. The second I had hold of him, we ran. We practically stumbled out of the room. I didn't look back. Not once. I had no interest in seeing whether the thing was still there. All I cared about was getting out. We ran straight into the living room. My heart was beating so fast, I thought it might explode. Even after reaching safety, I couldn't calm down. The image remained burned into my mind. That impossibly long neck, that head near the top of the doorway, that feeling that something was terribly wrong. The rest of the evening is a blur. I don't remember explaining everything to my parents. I don't remember whether my brother described what he saw. What I do remember is refusing to sleep in my room that night. There was absolutely no chance of that happening. I slept in the living room instead. Every little sound made me nervous. Every shadow seemed suspicious. I kept replaying the image over and over in my mind. Part of me expected the thing to appear again. Part of me feared it was standing somewhere in the darkness, watching. Morning eventually arrived. The sunlight made everything seem less frightening. When I looked into my room again, nothing appeared unusual. The bathroom doorway looked completely normal. The furniture remained exactly where it had always been. There was no sign of the strange figure. And perhaps the strangest part of all? I never saw it again. Not once. No matter how many times I entered that room afterward. No matter how many nights I slept there. No matter how many times I passed that bathroom doorway. The thing never returned. Years have passed since then. I've thought about the experience countless times. Maybe it was a shadow. Maybe my imagination filled in details that weren't really there. Maybe the combination of glow sticks, scary stories, childhood fear, and an oddly shaped object created the perfect illusion. All of those explanations are possible. In fact, they're probably the most likely explanations. But here's the thing. At 7 years old, standing in that bedroom, none of those explanations existed. All I knew was that I had looked toward the bathroom doorway and seen something that terrified me more than anything else in my childhood. Whether it was real, imagined, or somewhere in between, the fear was absolutely real. And even now, after all these years, I can still remember exactly how it felt to grab my brother's arm and run out of that room as fast as I possibly could. Thankfully, whatever I saw that day never appeared again. And honestly, I'm perfectly okay with that.
This happened to my boyfriend 56 years ago. He was only 8 years old at the time, and even though more than half a century has passed since then, it is still one of those stories that has never faded in his family. It was not something that happened when he was alone in the dark, half asleep, or already scared. It did not happen in an empty house where one person could be accused of imagining things. It happened in front of an entire room full of people. That is the part that has always made it so strange. There were witnesses, not one or two, but a whole group of family members sitting together in the same living room, all awake, all doing ordinary things, when something happened that none of them could explain. He was 8 years old, sitting in the living room at night. It was a normal family evening, the kind that seems almost too ordinary to turn into a story like this. There was no storm outside, no scary movie playing, no strange conversation about ghosts or death or anything supernatural. It was just the family gathered together at home. His dad was reading the newspaper. His mom was there. His brothers and sisters were there. His granddad was there too. Altogether, there were 9 people in the room, sitting in a loose circle, or gathered around the living room in the way families used to do more often back then. Everyone was reading, doing homework, or quietly keeping themselves busy. There is something very peaceful about that kind of scene when you picture it. A family in one room together at night, not staring at phones or spread out in separate rooms, but sharing the same space. A couple of lamps were on, giving the room a warm, soft glow. The kind of light that makes everything feel safe and familiar. The room would have had that quiet sound of paper turning, pencils moving, maybe someone shifting in a chair, maybe a soft cough or a page rustling. It was not silent, but it was calm. Everyone was doing something simple. Nothing about the moment suggested that anything strange was about to happen. My boyfriend was sitting there with a book. At 8 years old, he was old enough to remember the details, but still young enough for the world to feel bigger and stranger than it does to adults. He was probably sitting quietly, absorbed in the pictures or words on the page, not paying too much attention to the adults around him. His father was reading the paper, likely in that settled way fathers do when the day is over and the house is finally quiet. His mother was nearby. His brothers and sisters were focused on whatever they were doing. His granddad was there too, adding to the feeling that this was not just a random night, but a full family moment. Across the room from him, there was a tall glass candle burning. It was not right beside him. It was not on the table near him where he could have bumped it. It was across the room, standing where it had been placed, burning normally. A tall glass candle is not the kind of thing that should move by itself. It has weight. It sits where you put it. If it falls from the spot where it was already sitting. If someone knocks it over, it drops down or maybe rolls a little, depending on where it lands. But it does not fly across a room. It does not launch itself. It does not choose a person and cross the space between them. That is exactly what happened. All of a sudden, with no warning at all, the candle flew across the room. It did not tip over. It did not slide. It did not fall off a shelf. It flew. One moment it was across the living room, burning in its tall glass container. The next moment it came through the air and crashed into my boyfriend's head. He did not have time to duck. Nobody had time to grab it. Nobody had time to shout or move or understand what they were seeing. The candle just left its place and shot across the room like something had thrown it. It struck him hard enough to knock him over. For a second, nobody reacted. That might sound strange, but it makes sense to me. When something happens that is too unexpected, the human mind often freezes before it understands what to do. If a child trips or drops something, a mother moves immediately. If a glass tips over, someone reaches for it. If a candle burns too low, someone notices. But when a candle flies across a room by itself and hits a child in the head, the brain does not have a ready response for that. It is not part of normal life. It is not something people are prepared to see. So everyone just froze in shock. Imagine being in that room. 9 people sitting quietly, reading and doing homework. A couple of lamps glowing. A candle burning across the room. Then the sudden motion. The blur of glass and flame. The impact. The sound of it hitting an 8-year-old child. Maybe the crash of the candle. Maybe his body hitting the floor or chair as he was knocked over. That calm family room would have changed in an instant. The ordinary night would have split into two parts, before the candle moved and after. My boyfriend was knocked over. He was just a child, and something heavy enough to be noticed had hit him in the head with real force. The fact that it was a glass candle makes the whole thing even more disturbing. It could have hurt him badly. It could have cut him. It could have burned him if the flame was still lit when it struck or landed. It could have broken and sent glass everywhere. It could have hit his eye or temple. There were so many ways that moment could have been worse. But from what he has said, the biggest thing was the shock of it, the impossible nature of it, the fact that it came from across the room with no reason. Finally, his mother got up and made sure he was okay. That was the moment when normal family instinct came back. Whatever fear or shock had held everyone still finally broke, and his mom checked on him. I can only imagine what that must have been like for her. Her child had just been struck by an object that should not have moved. She would have been worried about him, but she also would have been trying not to think too deeply about what she had just seen. Parents often do that. When something frightening happens, especially in front of children, they sometimes focus only on the immediate practical thing. Is he hurt? Is he bleeding? Is he okay? Because if they let themselves focus on the bigger question, they might not be able to stay calm. He was okay, at least enough that the night did not turn into a medical emergency. But what happened next is almost as strange as the candle flying across the room. They just relit the candle and pretended nothing happened. That detail says so much about the family and the time. No one wanted to talk about it. No one wanted to sit there and say, how did that happen? No one wanted to admit that everyone in the room had just witnessed something impossible. Instead, they put the candle back, relit it, and carried on like the world had not just broken in front of them. Maybe they were trying to protect the children from fear. Maybe they were trying to protect themselves. Maybe they were religious or practical or old-fashioned in a way that made them believe some things were better left alone. Maybe they had no language for what had happened, so they chose silence. But silence does not erase a thing like that. Even if no one talked about it that night, everyone had seen it. They could pretend the candle had not flown across the room, but they all knew it had. His father had been there with the newspaper. His mother had been there. His brothers and sisters had been there. His granddad had been there. 9 people had been gathered in that room, and the candle had moved in front of all of them. It was not a dream. It was not something a child imagined. It was not a story created years later from one person's fear. It had witnesses. I think about what it must have felt like for my boyfriend as a child after that. Being 8 years old and having something impossible happen directly to you is different from only hearing about it. He was not just watching from across the room. He was the one it hit. The candle came for him, or at least it ended up striking him. And that must have made the event feel personal in a way no one could explain. Why him? Why not someone else? Why did it fly across the room in his direction? Was it aimed? Was it random? Did something throw it? Was there some force no one could see? These are questions an adult can wrestle with, but for a child, they become something deeper and more frightening. Maybe that is why the family pretended nothing happened. If they had started asking those questions out loud, the room might have become unbearable. The children might have cried. The adults might have scared themselves. The home might have stopped feeling safe. So they did what many families do when something impossible happens. They moved forward. They acted normal. They let the candle burn again. They returned to reading and homework and ordinary life, at least on the surface. But a room does not feel the same after that. A candle does not feel the same after that. I imagine my boyfriend looking at that candle later, wondering if it would move again. I imagine him sitting in the same living room on another night, trying to read, but watching objects out of the corner of his eye. A child who sees something fly across a room for no reason does not forget that objects are supposed to stay still. He probably learned in one sharp moment that the world could do things adults could not explain. Maybe the adults wanted to pretend nothing had happened, but he was the one whose head had been hit. His body remembered, even if everyone's mouth stayed quiet. The family members who are still alive talk about it to this day. That is the proof that pretending did not work. They may have relit the candle that night and acted like everything was fine, but the memory stayed with them. It followed them through the years. It became one of those family stories that people bring up when the conversation turns to strange things. The kind of story that begins with, "Do you remember that night?" And everyone who was there gets quiet, because yes, they remember. They all remember the candle. That is what makes it so hard to dismiss. If one person told the story, maybe you could say childhood memory changed it. Maybe he was hit by something that fell, and over the years the story became more dramatic. Maybe he remembered it wrong. But when several family members still talk about it decades later, and the core of the story remains the same, it becomes harder to explain away. Everyone remembers the candle flying. Everyone remembers it hitting him. Everyone remembers the shock. Everyone remembers the way the family simply moved on afterward, like nothing had happened. I have heard a lot of strange stories, but this one has a different feeling because it happened in such a normal setting. Many paranormal stories happen in abandoned houses, graveyards, dark roads, old tunnels, or lonely bedrooms at 3 a.m. This happened in a full living room with 9 people present. There were lamps on. People were awake. The family was together. The object was visible. The event was physical. A candle crossed space and struck a child. There is something deeply unsettling about that, because it removes the easy excuses. Darkness did not hide it. Isolation did not create it. Fear did not build it beforehand. It came out of an ordinary moment and forced itself into the room. I also think the reaction of the family says something important. People often imagine that if they witnessed something paranormal, they would scream, run, call someone, investigate, or never enter the room again. But real people often react in stranger, quieter ways. They freeze. They deny. They choose routine because routine feels safer. Relighting the candle and pretending nothing happened sounds unbelievable until you think about how badly people want the world to stay normal. If a candle flies across a room, maybe putting it back and lighting it again is a way of telling yourself that it is still only a candle, that the rules still apply, that your house is still your house. But the rules did not apply that night. Something moved that candle. That is the part no one has ever been able to explain. Could there have been a draft strong enough to push a tall glass candle across a room? No. Could it have slid off something and bounced in a strange way? Not across the room and into a child's head. Could someone have thrown it? Not with everyone sitting there watching, and not without someone admitting it or being seen. Could it have exploded or popped from heat? That would be different from flying across the room, and it would not explain the direction. Could a child have misremembered? Maybe, if he were the only one. But he was not. 9 people were there. That number matters. 9 witnesses make the story feel heavier. 9 people in the same room saw the same impossible thing. And even if some were children, there were adults too. His father, his mother, his granddad. People who would have understood if something normal had happened. People who would have corrected the story later if it had been exaggerated. Instead, The family still talks about it all these years later. Maybe the house had other strange things happen in it. Maybe there were stories before that night or after it. Maybe the family already knew something was odd, and that is why they tried so hard to ignore it. Or maybe this was the only event like that, which almost makes it worse. A single, sudden, violent moment with no warning and no follow-up. Sometimes one unexplained event can be more disturbing than a long haunting, because there is no pattern to study, no personality to understand, no reason to attach to it, just an object moving with force when it should not have moved at all. I wonder if the candle had any meaning. Was it just the closest object? Was it chosen because it was burning? Was it something about the flame, the glass, the light? Candles already carry a certain feeling in human minds. They are used for prayer, remembrance, comfort, ceremony, and atmosphere. A burning candle in a family living room should feel peaceful. But that night, it became something else. It became a weapon, or a message, or a sign, depending on how you look at it. It crossed the room and struck a child in front of everyone. The thought of its flame moving through the air is especially unsettling. A candle is supposed to be still and controlled. A little flame inside glass. Safe as long as it stays where it belongs. But flying across a room, it becomes dangerous. It brings fire, glass, and force all together. The fact that he was not seriously hurt feels lucky. If it had hit him differently, the story might not be told in the same way. It might have become a tragedy instead of a mystery. But he was okay. And because he was okay, the family could do what they did. They could check him, relight the candle, and pretend. If he had been badly injured, they would have had to confront it more directly. There would have been doctors, questions, maybe explanations demanded. Instead, because the immediate danger passed, they were able to bury the impossible part under normal behavior. The candle went back. The evening continued. The story went underground inside the family, waiting to be told later. That is how some family hauntings live. Not as constant activity, but as one event everyone remembers and no one can explain. It becomes part of the family's shared history, like a strange inheritance. New people hear about it and wonder what really happened. Older family members repeat the same details. The child who was hit grows old enough to tell it himself. The story becomes both unbelievable and undeniable because too many people carry the same memory. I do not know what caused that candle to fly across the room. I do not know if it was a spirit, some burst of energy, poltergeist activity, or something else entirely. I do not know if it had anything to do with my boyfriend specifically, or if he was simply the person in its path. I do not know why it happened on that night, in that room, with that family gathered together. I only know that according to the people who were there, it happened. A tall glass candle burning across the room suddenly flew through the air and crashed into an 8-year-old boy's head hard enough to knock him over. His whole family saw it. They were shocked. His mother checked him. Then they relit the candle and acted like nothing happened. But nothing about that is normal. And 56 years later, the family members who are still alive still talk about it. If you've stayed with me this far, then these stories didn't simply pass the time. They stayed with you. Everything you heard tonight was real. Real people. Real moments. And in each one, something quietly slipped out of place. If you'd like more of the kind that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Crowvane Manor. There are more rooms left open, and more stories waiting behind every door. I'm grateful you spent this part of your night here. Rest well, and I'll be waiting when you return.